there, everyone, and welcome to a brand new episode of Night Files. This episode has more of a musical bent to it, but it's not a musical episode per se, as seems to be the case in many shows. So, fortunately for everyone out there, you don't have to hear me sing. Instead, we're going to be looking into the case of a missing musician and singer-songwriter, Connie Converse. Who exactly was Connie Converse? The relatively obscure singer who had a lilting voice and a relaxing, folksy sound wrote and sang various songs throughout the 1950s, hoping to make a music career for herself. She struggled to make a strong breakthrough and, stunningly, has never been seen since her disappearance. So, what happened? To walk through this, let's start from the beginning. The singer known as Connie Converse was actually born Elizabeth Eaton Converse on August 3, 1924, in Laconia, New Hampshire. She was raised in a strict traditional and religious environment, especially with her father being a Baptist minister. Not too much is known of her early childhood except that she was considered academic. Her brother, Philip Converse, described her something of a polymath, and she ended up attending the family alma mater, Mount Holyoke College, on a merit scholarship. Over time, she grew dissatisfied with college life and tried her hand at making it in the Big Apple, the concrete jungle. The city that some say never sleeps. Of course, I'm talking about New York City. It was a year where she would get the nickname Connie and use it for her musical career. By day, she worked at the Academy Photo Offset Printing House, but by night, she forged her music career, writing songs of melancholy verse and soft guitar tunes. It's important to note that this was the 1950s, the era of doo-wop, swinging hips, and glossy commercial numbers. Connie's music might sound like standard folk to modern ears, but at the time, she was in stark contrast to what was in, so to say. Still, she trudged on and made an important connection in the form of graphic artist Gene Deitch. While better known today for his animation work on cartoons such as Popeye and Tom and Jerry, Deitch was able to serve as an audio engineer for Connie. Around 5 years before, he had recorded the political hymns of another artist, Pete Seeger. Deitch recorded Connie's work and was even able to get her a great gig, a performance on The Morning Show with one Walter Cronkite. While there are no recordings of this performance, one reviewer did say that they were looking forward to saying that they knew Connie before she even became a big star. Unfortunately, Connie wouldn't see that day of stardom. She spent most of the 1950s in New York, but never booked another gig after The Morning Show. By the time the 1960s rolled around, Greenwich Village was becoming the epicenter of folk music. A young man named Robert Zimmerman, better known as Bob Dylan, made a hit with his self-titled debut album and became a strong voice in the 1960s folk movement. By this time, Connie was middle-aged and with no success after a decade. She packed up her music dreams and left for Michigan to be near her brother, Phil. Connie worked as a writer for and managing editor of the Journal of Conflict Resolution in 1963. It's possible that Connie felt defeated seeing that she wasn't able to achieve success with her music because she wasn't in the right time and the right place. As far as anyone knows, she never wrote music again. She lived alone, with no interest in relationships, and relied more heavily on smoking and drinking toward the end of her time living in Michigan. By the 70s, Converse seemed burnt out. The journal where she worked was sold off and moved to Yale. Friends and family would send her on trips in hopes of improving her mood, but to no avail. One day, in 1974, her family received letters. In them, Connie wrote about her desire to make a new life somewhere else. Let me go. Let me be if I can. Let me not be if I can't. Human society fascinates me and awes me and fills me with grief and joy. I just can't find my place to plug into it. In her letter to Phil, Converse included a check and a request that he make sure that her health insurance is paid for and in good standing for a certain amount of time following her departure, but for him to cease paying the policy on a certain date. And with that, Connie Converse, her personal belongings, and her Volkswagen Beetle suddenly disappeared. The idea of leaving behind a life to start over alone sounds like something out of a storybook or urban legend. Was Connie able to actually achieve this? Her family and friends were unable to ever get in touch with her again. A private investigator stated he couldn't reveal her location even if he did uncover her whereabouts, because she left on her own accord. It's certainly not impossible to change one's name and live in obscurity, even though it does get harder and harder to do so in the digital age. Another singer, Q Lazarus, famous for singing Goodbye Horses, the song featured in Silence of the Lambs, was considered missing or dead for decades due to unclaimed royalties. Miraculously, she was found in 2018 to be living on Staten Island. Difficult to find doesn't necessarily mean dead. And certainly, living off the grid would have been a much easier feat in the 70s, given her lack of close connections. A couple years after her sister disappeared, someone told Phil of an Elizabeth Converse they'd found in a phone book in the Midwest. He felt that even if this Elizabeth Converse was his sister, he couldn't bear to make contact. He stated that leaving was her choice, and I would be embarrassed to show up on her doorstep and say, "Hey, what's going on?" Let's fast forward a few decades to 2004. Spinning on Air, a WNYC show, has Gene Deitch as a guest host. For the most part, he plays some jazz numbers, but he also decides to pay tribute to one of his old connections, Connie Converse, by playing some of her songs. Two people listening in at the time included Dan DeZula and David Herman, who were soon inspired to track down any additional recordings of Converse. The world had to hear this woman and not let her linger in obscurity. They got in contact with Deitch and Philip Converse, both of whom found additional recordings for Converse stored away. Finally, in March 2009, How Sad, How Lovely, containing 17 songs by Converse, was released, and the rest is, well, history. After never seeing success in her time, Connie became something of a cult hit in the 21st century. Her songs became a minor hit on Spotify, something unimaginable in the 60s. Reviewers noted that she was ahead of her time by singing about personal struggles and narratives set to grainy acoustics. People were so taken by the story of a struggling artist that people made tribute albums, a play, a modern dance piece, and even a documentary devoted to Converse. After facing obscurity, bad luck, and bad timing, Connie was finally getting recognition for her work, thanks to the efforts of those who carried on her legacy. Today, at the time of this recording, she would be 96. No one still knows what happened to her or where she may have gone. And while she may have been lost, part of her still lives on. Well, that's all the time we have today, folks. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Night Files, which admittedly could be a nicer break from some of the darker tales. If you have anything to comment, drop it down in the box below. Otherwise, I hope you'll give us a like, and we'll see you in the next one. This is Night Files, signing off.
A witch there was, and a wizard as well, moved into a rose-covered cottage in hell.